Play, Watch, Listen is a mostly games industry podcast featuring mostly game developers, and it is funded entirely by supporters on Patreon.
To that end of massive games, have you played Outlaws?
A little bit?
Yes.
A little bit. Not a ton.
Is that because you've been busy or because it was not sustaining your interest?
Both. Too many video games. Always a problem. Consistent problem.
There are too many video games, especially this month. Like, it's built up. Yeah.
I'm so excited about Astrobot. I'm still trying to get through Black Myth Wukong. I just started playing the casting of Frank Stone, which has been really fun. I play every Supermassive game. And a little bit of, which I'm sure is reflected in the sales, the reviews as well, I suppose, both Ubisoft and Star Wars fatigue. I think if this game had come
You're kind
out...
of done with both of those?
Well,
or
not
at least
done with, you know,
exhausted.
Just a little... They don't feel fresh to me anymore, really. I imagine if this was the first Ubisoft game you'd ever played, or if this game had come out 5-10 years ago, people would have lost their minds over it. I think the game's okay.
It's interesting that there would be Star Wars fatigue for gamers. I get it if you're talking about the IP in general, like there's just new shows all the time, and you know, most of them are
feels
not
like
exactly
Jedi
thrilling.
Survivor was like a week ago.
That was over a year ago.
I know, but it still feels so recent. And then like this, I do feel like there is not a shortage of Star Wars games, especially considering how many I've like. Because it's not like there's that many Ubisoft games that I play that are that formulaic. But when you consider the last 10 years of releases, it's just a lot compared to other franchises, other types of games.
That's a fair point. I guess I just look at it where I go. I see the Star Wars games as, with the exception of Andor, they're like the torchbearer of how Star Wars sort of from one fan's point of view ought to feel. Because I thought Fallen Order and Jedi Survivor were both pretty excellent. They at least insofar as they really felt like the Star Wars games of old that made me fall in love with Star Wars games. And to be honest, I understand the criticisms, but I beat Outlaws already. Like I put probably 30 hours in, in bits and pieces
for some reason.
Well, I skipped a shit ton because at some point I was like, I really got to get back to work. So like I was very completionist on the first third, and then a little bit less in the middle third.
That's most open world games, right?
And then by the time there was like quite a bit of unfinished shit on the map by the time I was like, you know what, I need to just pull the trigger. But I think that the game, you're probably right. If people are feeling fatigued, nothing they could do about that. But as someone who has a pretty easy buy-in with Star Wars, if anything, the open world format is a harder buy-in with me. And I thought they did it in a way that feels very Star Wars.
I think as well. Oh, sorry, go on.
I mean, it has its jankiness, but as someone who works,
I didn't mean that in an accusatory tone. I meant the floor is yours. Tell me what you like about it. Not what was even good about it, Austin.
Defend yourself, old man. I heard it in the spirit that you meant it, and also I would say I like most everything about it. When I see the complaints, they don't really land with me. I'm usually pretty good at going, I could see that, but I didn't feel that way. In this case, it was even more extreme than that, where I was like, boy, I don't really see that. For example, I saw complaints about, this is mostly like Twitter chatter, so it doesn't really mean anything, but I saw people complaining about specifically the voice acting of the main character. I'm a little less sold on the writing for the main character, because it's just a little bit, we're still kind of in that era that like, MCU, everything has to be very quippy all the time.
Drives me nuts.
And
they're not too bad. There were moments at the start of Star Wars Outlaws where she's introduced to the like gang of ruffians she's planning to work with, like the blonde woman shows up, and I was like, this is where the quips start. And they didn't. And I was like, oh, there's some restraint here. I think like we're maybe shifting away from the over quippiness slowly. People are realizing it's a bit much.
A little, yeah, for sure. This is not a egregious offender. But if I had to pick at something from that comes through the voice actor, it was not her performance that bothers me. It would be they make her do quippy things. Like there's a bit towards the end where she has to put on a stormtrooper outfit to sneak into a Star Destroyer, and they're like, "Where are you going?" And she's like, and I was like, not the very convincing stormtrooper right now. And like but her character has every believable quality of being able to
that
be
joke's been in Star
stone-faced.
Wars since New Hope, though, right? Like the whole I'm a stormtrooper and you know, pressing the intercom button, right? That's like,
yeah, no, fair. You're up against the charisma of peak Harrison Ford if you're going to try
fair.
to.
Now that's a fair criticism. That's fair.
That's
yeah,
actually the criticism I would.
And there's only one actor who can reproduce the charisma of Harrison Ford, as we know.
That's true.
In the world.
Well, yeah, or so we shall find out.
Yeah, allegedly. That would be my bigger criticism of her, actually, is that I think they wrote her to be a little too much like Harrison Ford, and so sometimes it feels a little parody. And I also don't think that's a performance issue.
Yeah, no,
she's basically Harrison Ford reskin. Han Solo, rather, not Harrison Ford. Very different people. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's a bit of that. She's a little bit more empathetic, at least than he is at the start. You know, like they do a lot of stuff I really like. There's a lot of interesting, like the way they kind of build the dynamic with the droid that's sort of your main companion through the game, the sort of Clone Wars era commando droid, which is a cool thing. Again, that's another thing they get really right, is that Star Wars at its best selectively draws from different parts of the canon in order to make it feel like this is a world, you know? So like when you go into a backwater chop shop on one of the, you know, non-Tatooine like famous locations, and in the back room where there's nothing in there except some loot, because you're like me and I just scrounge constantly and I end up fabulously wealthy by the time I reach the end of these games because I have way more shit than I need. There's like a half disassembled A-wing like covered with drapes and stuff, and it serves no narrative function, but I go, that's what they always used to do. That was like how they get it. And that's when you like when you watch Andor, for example, and there's all the what's his name, Skarsgård, like the like antique shop dealer, where they have little things like that sprinkled kind of in the background as a way to go, if you have a keen eye, you'll recognize some of these.
I heard that Tatooine specifically is like incredible. Like, you're not the only friend that I have who really likes it. My friend Bruce Green, who's a Twitch streamer, is like been raving about it. I think Rahul really enjoyed Tatooine, where he was basically like, this is one of the best like open world versions of Tatooine to ever exist, and it fully is like just exploring the early movies.
Yeah, they do a good job at the thing that I think Fallout was always the most successful at, which is if you just pick a direction and go, you will find something that's cool, or maybe even a whole quest line, and it will not be on the map. It's not until you get close to
Starfield. They didn't have that. It's such a Bethesda
that's what I heard.
do. And yeah, they didn't have it in Starfield. It's such a bummer.
That was my single favorite thing about Fallout 3 in particular. I felt like you tripped over interesting shit everywhere you went.
All the time. Love it so much for that. And that was actually the one thing that I liked the least about New Vegas, which, you know, everyone considers the peak of Fallout. So it would seem on Reddit, is in the U-shaped map. You are sort of, you can't really go through the middle of the map to begin with, because I think it's full of death claws, if I remember correctly. So early on, you kind of have to follow a path, whereas Fallout 3, I can walk anywhere and find whatever crazy thing, and you're totally right. It was always something unexpected and fresh and cool. Such a fun way to play.
This is loaded with that, and this is and they tie it in. It's not just, oh, here's a cool thing, or here's like a cool piece of world art, but they have all this skill progression stuff where, you know, you unlock abilities, passive and active abilities. And sometimes, you know, you have to go find, like, okay, you want to upgrade your blaster, you need a certain part. It doesn't tell you where to find it. You just have to kind of go randomly wandering, and then you come across like a Jawa who goes, oh, you know, I will generate a quest for you to find that part, and I will trade you blah, blah, blah for it. And then you might be able to find where to go. And I found that it was rewarding, not just aesthetically, but in core game loop type ways, to just meander. And the environments are beautiful. It was one of those where all the environments where, it felt like Star Wars as a fucking, you know, sort of hopelessly will return to the well, no amount of being burned will ever somehow permanently burn me Star Wars fan. I will always go back to it. It delivered. Also, I must give huge shout out to my friend and colleague Will Roger, who was the composer.
Even from the title screen, that music was great.
Yeah, it's a proper. I thought he managed to successfully do what Ludwig did on Mandalorian, which is make something that feels very successfully Star Wars adjacent, while not being afraid to go elsewhere.
Yeah.
Principally, he leans heavily on a bunch of like very kind of nasty hip hop 808 kind of stuff throughout the score. That's just super un-John Williams, but marries it with a very loyal John Williams kind of orchestral aesthetic, which they recorded very properly, Royal Scottish National Orchestra. And it's I think it works, you know, and Will can write a great tune. I mean, he's had a fucking killer year because he also did Helldivers 2. And that also has a pretty astounding, excellent tune at its core. He's really good at that. And so anyway, I found myself just going, yeah, look,
how do you feel about, because this is a really common complaint that I see, how do you feel about the stealth sections? Like I feel like that's the most frequent complaint that I've seen, is that the auto fail stealth missions are too frequent. Is maybe what it is.
I don't think
are they as the game goes on? I feel like they are very.
Sure.
There's a lot of them right at the start, but I feel as it opens up, I feel like there's more. You can kind of Han Solo your way out of most problems.
Oh, like you can talk your way out of things? Oh, you mean shoot?
No, shoot.
Yeah. Blast your way. Yeah.
First.
Most of them are not. I would say Mike is dead on. It is a thing that is mostly to be found early in the game. I also never really minded them because they never felt unfair. They never felt like they were narrowly, like you had to, it suddenly got weirdly difficult, spiky, because the fail conditions were too easy, and especially with your little buddy Nix. And once you get the distract ability, the ability to kind of send people off in other directions and that sort of thing. But as you get further into the game, I don't feel like that's representative of an outsized proportion of the gameplay. Again, it was one of those where I'd be hard pressed to find like a big glare. I mean, look, it crashed a bunch and like I had graphics bugs and stuff, but I don't know if it's because of working in the industry and having also worked on multiple open world games. The software feat to pull off a game of this many interlocking systems with this much left to player agency, it's amazing to me any of these games ever launch at all. So I'm really forgiving when it comes to bugs on a game like this, because I just know, having done the
Bethesda, it's like they're so big. How do you even QA that map? That when people talk about Bethesda games having bugs, I feel like I know I'm not allowed to say this. If it gets clipped and put on Twitter, I get canceled immediately. But I kind of find them charming. Like the bugs in a Bethesda game are kind of charming to me because sometimes they're just funny. And B, as opposed to what games just never come out.
Well, yeah, because all these contingent variables to reproduce,
they're huge.
To reproduce the exact circumstances that might yield a bug on a game of this starts to become a combinatorial. I mean, Mike, obviously, I'm sure you can speak to this more.
I literally was in a conversation about this exact problem earlier, in terms of and as well just how rare. So we have a bug, or we don't have a bug. We have the potential for a bug that impacts 1 in a million players. And as a game designer, going, what, or as a director, as a company owner, do we let that through? Because someone will find it. We will eventually, enough players will have played the game through enough times that these things creep in. I have no idea. I'm with you, Alon. I have no idea how you QA a Bethesda scale experience. Just because of the interlocks. That's the thing. It's what Austin said. It's like a strictly linear game is very easy to QA. You just keep running up that player stairs and stuff goes wrong. But yeah, the second you've got it's exponential. The second you have 10 systems interacting with 10 systems, that's 100 potential overlaps, right? And it just scales from there. It's rice on a chessboard. It's crazy.
How do you from your perspective, Mike, how do you prioritize QA? How do you prioritize what bugs get fixed where? Do you do it by what you think is going to be the easiest to fix, or is it what is the most common bug? Or what's the most game-breaking bug? I just have no idea.
Yeah, it's usually severity. So you have severity. So there's different vectors you can rate it on. So we generally have priorities and severities when it comes to bugs. So severity is progress blocker. Can the player not get past this point in the game?
Right.
Critical, which would be a crash or something that actually blows up your computer, or wipes your save completely or something like that. Major, minor, blah blah blah. But then we also track on priority. So there might be a bug that let me think of an example here. So if you've got an action game and your character stops, their legs stop moving when they're running around. They just kind of freeze frame as they're sliding around. That's technically a minor bug. It doesn't cause any problems. It doesn't break the game, but it looks really embarrassing and bad, right? So that would be a high priority, low severity bug,
right?
Because you would want to fix it because it looks stupid,
right?
And especially if you know it happens all the time. You also then have repro rate, so the idea of like how often a bug occurs. So like if a bug happens 100% of the time, A, those are easier to fix or easier to know if you fix them, and B, obviously more important. Whereas something if there's a crash that you know will crash the game, lose everyone's save data, but you know it's only going to happen 1 in a million times, you may well put that at a lower prioritization than you would put a bug that will make, a section of your game run at 15 frames a second for half an hour for everyone who plays the game. So you're always weighing it up, and you never fix every bug.
That's what I was going to say. How possible is it to fix 100% of bugs? How many games do you think have ever done that?
I think the only ones that have ever come close to it have been the ones that have stopped adding content and just done fixes. So like weirdly, strangely, like there's these situations like Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines, where the community has just kept bug fixing that game out. Is a very buggy game at launch. Fantastic game, but very buggy. And then you have the community just spends like 15 years fixing every single bug in that game, 20 years fixing every single bug in that game. So it can happen, but you've got to lock your features. And most games, you've got a few months at the end where you've actually locked those features and you can actually focus on those bug fixes. Until that point, everyone is just trying to make the game better, obviously trying to add stuff, expand on it. So yeah, it's a balancing act. And I think QA as a field has certainly matured in the time I've been working in games. I think the audience looks at QA and they think about those kind of what most of the jobs are, which is like playing the game a lot, finding problems, logging them, sharing them with the team. But there's a level of QA which is more of a kind of a producer manager kind of role, where you are making the kinds of decisions you're talking about, Lana. That is a profession. That is a skill set to pick that out.
And there's some really
I have people who work with me who do that stuff as their only focus, and I'll do a meeting with them once a week and they'll lay out exactly the kind of the heat
don't you have to do some
issues.
of that stuff too? Like, would that not be on a director to make some of those calls as well? Or is that is QA, because I think that we probably industry-wide, and I'm equally guilty of this, think QA is the easy job. Like, it's like, that's the entry-level job, but really there are people who are experts at QA who are extremely experienced at bug fixing.
That's the difference. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about in terms of experience. So yeah, it is. I think this is a reasonable statement. I'm sure that people out there will disagree with me. I think entry-level junior role QA is the lowest barrier of entry, because you don't need to know how to code, you don't need to know how to draw, you don't need to you can just walk in as someone who is passionate and interested. But yes, someone who's been in that job. I know QA people who've kind of been in the industry for 15, 20 years who are as prestigiously skilled in the field of QA as any programmer is in coding, right? It's a skill set, and you can get to that level, but at that level, you're not so much just sitting trying to break the game. Those people do exist, and those people will muck in when they need to, but it's much more about that high level figuring out test plans. That's the other big thing and this is where you start to get towards the Bethesda scale of game, which is you have those QA people who are no longer thinking about how do I find this bug, but thinking, okay, how do I create a sequence of testing that can happen that is most likely to find a bug? What's the instead of working out which foot should I put in front of the other, how do I work out this mile-long hike through the game? How do I make all of the steps that will kind of figure that out? So no, it's a massively skilled job. And the people who do it are fantastic. In terms of whether that's my job, sometimes on an indie scale, yes, but usually the question I'm trying to answer most of the time is how do we make the game feel better and be better and convey its vision and be more fun to play. That's more my focus, rather than kind of does it work. Does it work is something that there are better people than me to figure that out.
That makes sense. There's a really interesting thing that I feel like I'm seeing more of the longer I've worked in AAA, which is making decisions about what players actually care about versus what they say they care about. So as an example, in Star Wars Outlaws, pretty early on in the game, there's a moment where the protagonist has to sneak through a checkpoint, and she puts her hands in pockets that don't exist and puts her head down, and that's her stealth mode. And it looks a little silly, but it's her hands completely clipped through. the front of her jacket. Like there's no pocket in any, and so that gets a bunch of criticism because people are like, well, they couldn't even put her hands in her pockets while she walks through this checkpoint.
Yeah.
But that's a thing that she does so rarely that the only way you'd even
and she's
see
mostly got her back to the camera
right,
as
you'd have
well,
to flip
usually,
to look at it, and I was like, you could argue that broke your immersion, but in the grand scheme of things that need to be solved, you don't really care about that. And the only way that like you can tell players that it's difficult to express to players that they don't really care about that because they haven't seen the things that did get fixed, right?
It's they don't know how bad it was.
Yeah, that was on a list of shit that they knew about. That one.
But I also think
really
they also, I think as well, and this is kind of the flip of what you're saying. As a developer, I have to constantly remind myself that the player does not give a shit about the process of production, and neither should they.
Totally.
They care about the product being good. So, like, a lot of this stuff, like, I remember playing Left 4 Dead 2, and, like, in that game, a character takes... Is it that she takes a jacket off, or she puts a... There's, like, a piece of clothing that goes on and off, and every game developer was like, that is incredible pioneering work. The idea of you could put a shirt on in a video game,
that's... that too.
Last of Us. What did I say? Sorry,
You said Left 4 Dead too. Oh, you're talking about the same thing. It's Dina. Yeah, or she puts a shirt on and takes it off, and everyone's like, "How the fuck did they do that?"
Yeah, but the thing is, crucially, there, game developers like that's amazing. That's incredible. It's never been done before. But every player who plays the game, who's casually disinterested and is just enjoying the story and the gameplay, that in their mind at that point, clothing's a solved problem. Game characters can have clothing. You can put something in a pocket. You can check. It just becomes the new normal. And it's fascinating when, especially like if you're at the lower budget end of things, which is where I often am, you can't. It's a running joke of like we will record like a little webcam video of our team members kind of popping up on screen and going, hey, just to let you know at this point, we don't have the budget to make that character's lips move while they're talking, so we're just going to move past that, but I want you all to know that we really care and we did this, and you can't do it. You can't explain away those things.
Dude, so much of my job is, have we asked animation if we can afford that? Like, so much of my job is, can I write that? Or is animation going to say we can't do that? Like, honestly...
But players don't realise that.
It's like 70% of the job. Is have we checked with animation?
I feel bad, and with something like an Ubisoft open world game as well, like, there are going to be... I saw a lot of criticism of, like, the animation on characters not being up to, like, AAA standards in that game. It's like, if I'm making Last of Us, I have to... And with full respect and love to the team that made that game... You've got about 10 characters to worry about at that high fidelity level, and then you've got a lot of kind of NPCs that you can kind of do a bit less on. Like, if you're making like an open world game, A, you've got more characters, B, you're having to do a lot of procedural kind of randomization and stuff with those character faces so that you don't see the same face twice as you're walking around. There's just so many layers of concessions. And again, to a player, to the average player, this just sounds like a bunch of excuses.
Yeah, no, totally. Yes. And I get what you're saying there and appreciate that too.
All creative work across all media
is a bunch of concessions for sure. And I think like that's definitely a thing where with the shirt thing in The Last of Us 2, I sometimes wonder if that, like, yes, players don't care about that. It doesn't mean anything to them really. I guess it would if it were wrong. But so it's also that the games industry is just full of a bunch of nerds who like doing cool stuff with tech, So a lot of it is like they're still human. So a lot of it's just, you reckon we could do that? Wouldn't that be fucking cool?
Can do. Yeah,
it's just like nerdy people getting nerdy about stuff that they are learning how to do for the first time. And that's like a lot of where the passion is and why people stay is like getting to be creatively expressive, even if it doesn't mean anything to players. And I appreciate your point that like we can explain how development works and how complicated it is. And the truth is that should not matter to consumers. Like I understand like Austin, what you're saying, being like, with a game like this that's this big, I'm gonna give them a lot of pass for bugs. I feel the exact same way, but I also agree with the point that the general public doesn't have any reason to listen to that. It's not their job to care about how difficult our jobs are, and I know you're not saying that either.
No, I don't. I think
when you've worked on it, you can't not see it that way.
Yeah, of course. Well, that's the thing. Being from within the industry, I have enormous empathy for no one. If a game comes out and is not great, and I think Outlaws is pretty great, but if there's a game that's not particularly great, no one involved aspired to make it not great. That's like the number one thing you learn working in the industry. I've worked on games that crashed and failed where people put their whole soul into it, and just sometimes the universe conspires against you, you know? And the same, the flip is also true. Sometimes a game is a total train wreck until for some reason, one day it just kind of turns a corner and then it comes out and it's like a dynamite that goes off, and it looks in hindsight as if, oh, we were on this train to make this absolute classic. And it's like, I guess 48 hours earlier, this thing was, I remember the Cult of the Lamb director putting a tweet out, you know, that was like 6 months before launch or something. This was a steaming pile of shit. Like, or something like that. God. Yeah, it's amazing. And, you know, so I will add about your shirt pockets thing. One hypothesis that I can add to the, obviously I don't know the story on this one. I didn't even notice the particular thing when I played the game that you're describing, but yeah. But having worked on games before that have had similar crossroads that I've just kind of been a fly on the wall for, obviously music is not usually involved, but I like to attend a lot of stand-ups and hear about this kind of stuff. And one of the, if I could imagine a very plausible hypothetical, that they designed the character, like the character model and the clothing and all that way back, because that's one of those things that there's this pressure to get, you know, we have to try to make someone as iconic as possible and memorable. And so that's like front loaded
character models.
Yeah. And particularly when you're
the first assets in most games to get made. Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, exactly. And particularly when you're dealing with higher level, like Disney approval, Lucasfilm, you know, like, so that's going to be a thing that was front loaded.
That's like.
Yeah, I'm sure it's pretty smooth and casual. So there's
exactly very chill.
There's a so there your character model is decided a long time ago, and then as they're finishing the game, and this moment is occurring, and players are not realizing, oh shit, I need to be in hyper aware stealth mode. Someone goes, hey, what if we change the body language of the character? That's a relatively easy fix in this moment in order to try to communicate to the player how they should be playing this moment. And so they go, well, our character model that we decided 2 years ago doesn't really support this, but it's a fix for this one moment to make the objective clear to the player. People make those kinds of decisions all the time.
It's just this game's version of that. But they can't
the Assassin's Creed thing.
Yeah, the Assassin's Creed brain. But they can't do that, so they have to come up with something else, and it is visual language from behind to tell you that you are entering that state and why you're walking slower and what you're supposed to be doing. And I think that's such a big thing about game design too, that also only occurred to me more recently, is that games are really just a series of tricks to tell the player how to finish the game. And it's like, it's such a funny thing when we talk about like FromSoft games, that they are designed to tell you how to finish them. Like we
are teachers of useless skills.
Yeah, the whole premise of a video game is, how do we tell a person how to finish this game? Like that's their whole job, is how do we get them to understand everything and get to the end and figure out where they're going 100% of the time.
I've genuinely had like some of the best game design conversations I've had with like primary school teachers, because it's exactly the same job. Like fundamentally, you're
trying to figure out how to teach someone.
You're teaching someone, and that person just wants to have fun. They don't want to wait for you. They want to just kind of do what they're going to do, and you've got to try and instill that understanding. And you don't want to be crazy strict with them. You don't want to like make their experience boring. You have to lean into the play of it. We're teachers.
That's a very cool way
of putting it. We're just teaching utterly useless skills.
Teaching them how to play that one thing.
Yeah. Which is much easier than teaching like reading and writing, I imagine. I think that's probably a higher tier.
I mean, everybody can read and write. Not everybody can play Star Wars Outlaws. You know what I mean?
The feedback that a game can offer to tell you if you're learning it certainly, undoubtedly, makes it easier than learning foundational skills like reading and writing. Just because you immediately know if it's obviously, depending on the kind of game mechanics we're talking about,
failed.
The feedback can be pretty unambiguous pretty immediately.
We also have literacy problems ourselves. Like when we're doing tutorial design, nothing is a more entertaining than, well, it's lots of things, but entertaining than doing like playtesting, where you put your first version of a tutorial in front of a player and you realize, oh, they've never played a game with two thumbsticks being used for movement and looking before. Right. And you've kind of you've got to build the theatre for the play. You've got to teach them which direction to look in. You've got to kind of teach people what language is. You've got to kind of do everything all in the first 20 minutes while being interesting enough that people engage with it.
It's not straightforward. I spoke to somebody recently who worked on a game that came out that flopped. did not review well, was not received well, did not make much money. And I was like, "Did you know?" And he was like, "We had no fucking idea." I was like, "Really?" They had zero clue because all of their mock reviews and playtests were positive. And it's like you'd be like, "How did they not know?" If you get all the positive feedback in the world from the people you're paying for the feedback, how are you supposed to know? Like, what if all your systems are there from every other game you ever made and it's still there, how the fuck are you supposed? Playtesting's like,
it swings the other way as well, as
so
Austin
tough.
was saying earlier. Like, you
Right.
can absolutely, like, we always, obviously, before a game comes out, we always have, like, internal prediction of, like, this one feels like it's going to be one of the ones that really clicks, or this one feels like it's good, we're proud of it, but, like, it's not going to quite, and we're always wrong. We've always misjudged everything until you see the reviews. You know the basic range, but you don't know.
I remember.
And also, it can be about when you hit and what came out 2 weeks before, and all. It's contextual.
I remember talking
can
to Eric
definitely
Williams about God of War Ragnarok the day before it came out because we were in the office pretty much that whole week, I think. And I was talking to Eric about it and asking how he was feeling, and he was like, "I have no idea." We were all like, "What do you mean?" And he was like, and there were leaks, and he was like, "What if the game's been spoiled for everybody?" And we were like, "Eric, I think you're gonna be fine." And he was like, Nothing's gonna go well," and then it comes out, people love it. But it's like when you're that close to something for that long, we've spoken about this a million times, you can't see it objectively, regardless of what any of the feedback says either. Like, it's just so tough to weigh the multitudes of things that which bug matters and what animation matters and doesn't matter, and how are people going to receive.
For the second half of development, I don't know if the game's good or not. I don't know if the game's good or not. I just know what I could do in the next week to make it slightly better. That's all I'm ever worried about.
Yeah.
Like, that's ultimately, and I rely on producers, partners, buddies to kind of put their hand on my shoulder and say, "Mike, it's good enough, Mike," or "It's not going to get any better, Mike." You know, you do rely on that.
Let it go.
There they go. It's time.
It does feel like that whole back half of it, everything you're doing is at best like this is obviously a very kind of stupid way to think of it, but it weirdly helps me have a kind of clarity when making priorities, where you go, this thing that we can do to improve the game, like we can add a meaty chunk here, but it might be a little half baked because we don't have as much time to work on it, versus polishing this other thing, but it's like a little older and not like we came up with it earlier. It doesn't have quite the benefit of all the things we've learned, but all these little decisions. I always think of it in terms of, this one feels like this one will move the Metacritic 0.25%. That one is like maybe a 0.5%. And so all of them feel in a way fruitless. But when you zoom out and go, if we make 1,000 0.25% moves, we've really substantially improved. Well, that's a bad math because that would soar us into the stratosphere. But you know what I mean, like
200%.
That's a better description of like what a director's job is. Of like a big part of my job is just deciding which of those 0.5% of Metacritic points are going to get us where we want to get to. Like that is because there's always things that can be fixed. There's always things that can be tweaked. The director's job is ultimately to have a sense of perspective and taste, but even then, like, you're kind of lost as well. So it's always an interesting process.
That made me realize
very hypercritical as well, which I think probably plays into that.
There's something I wanted to riff on about the QA stuff that you reminded me of a minute ago, was having filled a number of like Jira bug reports in my time. It's funny, to your point of ranking them by severity, that's like one of the little drop-down menu options, right? You find a bug and you have to say, so that it gets categorized for the engineers who are going to be addressing it, they can sort by how bad the problem is. And I can tell you, it is a very humbling thing to learn your place in the pecking order as a composer in a game, to realize that absolutely none of mine will ever reach. Like, if I'm playing the game specifically
unless
on
you've
the
got
HUD,
a file mislabeled that crashes the game when it tries to play, you are not touching the top of those prioritize.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like,
lists at all.
the only time I've ever
music, we'll deal with that the day before the game comes out.
Yeah, that's
Maybe
a day one patch.
Yeah, it's such a common bug. Yeah,
I've learned that nothing I contribute. It's always an interesting. But like to using your like non-triggering leg animation example, that's kind of where a lot of music bugs would fall, where I go, the music is supposed to trigger when you enter this room, and it kept triggering significantly late because the system isn't registering that you've entered into this physical volume and for whatever reason until 30 seconds after I'm in. And the whole point of the music changing was it's supposed to be impactful when you first enter the space or whatever. And it's an interesting where we go, is that major because it's aesthetic and probably fairly noticeable?
Well, that's why we also track on priority.
Is it minor?
For that exact reason.
Is this definitely not game breaking?
It's very important for you, and it is important for the atmosphere of the game, but it's not important versus a crash.
Given limited engineer time.
Yeah.
My catchphrase is we can't fuck up this early. Like, I have, like, for me as well, like, in the progression of a game, like, if the music may or may not have actually been a bug we just fixed. If the music is breaking, like, 20 minutes into the game, or not sounding quite right 20 minutes into the game, that is something you have to fix, because that's your first impression. Like, you know that if the music breaks 9 hours, 10 hours, 20 hours into a game experience, the player's going to wince, but they're going to move on. They're not going to tell their friend about that problem. That's not going to be an issue.
Right.
Yeah, so you're always, that's why we prioritize as well as severity. We have both, because
but also
there are cases like this and the leg's not moving where, yeah, no one's Xbox is going to start smoking because of this problem, but at the same time, like, it will be a million TikTok videos of the character sliding around the environment, right?
And that's the thing. That's why I say it can be quite humbling, because at least that one, the player even knows something went wrong. The truth, I always come back to that Ratatouille thing where he says his monologue at the end in the review of Chef Anton Ego, where he says the truth that every critic must face is that the average piece of junk is worth more to people than our criticism designating it junk. And like, so by way of analogy,
but to be fair, the people who made Ratatouille hadn't seen video essays at that point, so they didn't know the art form.
They weren't familiar with Bomberman.
They hadn't been educated.
I was going to say,
problematic views.
H-Bomber Guy, it justifies it.
Yeah, he wasn't there yet.
Yeah. So Ratatouille is now wrong because of H-Bomber Guy. I love that.
Retroactively.
With that,
that's amazing. With that, by way of analogy, the sad truth is that most people simply have no idea the music is even bugging. The one time I've ever been able to lay claim on actual critical bugs was when I was working on Stray Gods, as you can imagine, where it would be like, I clicked this and it triggered the wrong narrative beat through the song. Those are obviously, but then the funny thing was, yeah, exactly. So that was like my one moment of being like, haha, my bug reports matter for once. But the funny thing was, there's also a score in that game that is between the songs, like while they're in dialogue and during the kind of discovery mode where you're clicking on things in the environment and stuff. But the score is very interactive in those moments where it's also going to do things like, if you earlier were in this scene and romanced this character, we're going to smuggle like an instrument into this scene that's associated with that character, and you will hear a different instrument if you made a different choice. And it's funny how all that is springboarding off the back of the songs. That's like where that vocabulary is established. But we definitely had some of those. I can't reproduce this bug, but I have video capture to prove that it played the wrong file. But it's during the underscore, it's not during a song. And like, I guess I have to let it go, even though it kills me.
If a tree falls in the woods, but nobody's around to hear it, do you log the bug?
Yeah. It can be pretty painful sometimes.
Games are so fucking cool though. Conversations like this is like, it's just so many people putting so much thought into everything for you to receive a product where you don't have to think about any of that. And, like, you're not even aware of it if it's cohesive, right? Like, that's so fucking cool that, like, I would never even consider, Austin, that a composer would be logging bugs. Like, that, you've spoken about it before, but, like, pre this podcast,
he's logging hundreds. Every single beat that is missed, Austin is logging a bug.
He's actually primarily hired as QA.
It's 50% of the bugs in the database.
It's because I'm pretty entry level, so I needed a way in. I mean, look, I'm probably a little bit more anal than most because I tend to go pretty intense on the interactive design, and that's where bugs are going to occur in music.
Yeah.
Although I will say, I've probably told this story here before, but the best ever music bug story in the history of game is on Alien Isolation, where they had this cool system set up where when you're hiding in the lockers and the xenomorph is close to you, and you're supposed to like not breathe and you can't turn on the scanner or you'll get kind of auto instant killed. They had this thing where the music would dynamically swell into this nasty, dissonant, horrifying kind of crescendo. But there was a bug where the music would occasionally get like a false positive on the location of the Xeno, and it would just do that with no Xeno there. And it made the game so fucking terrifying that they kept the bug.
Yeah.
They kept the bug in the game because it just made it like, where is he? I don't see him. Oh my God, what's happening? And it just added to the atmosphere. So
that's what's good about bugs. That's
bug.
what's fascinating.
Yeah, they leaned into it.
Well,
yeah.
and that's the thing that's different, and I've heard this from programmers who work in more conventional kind of software development, is because games have just so many interlocking, overlapping systems, most of which have been made by many people or by different people, in big games, like people in different teams in different countries, right? Like this systemic outcome is so complex that bugs are an inevitability of the system, right? You've got so much going on that chaos, Jurassic Park stuff will happen. It's going to happen. And I think that's what's really cool to me. I'll tell that story after we finish recording, but I'm excited by the kind of bug that happens because the world is rich enough to justify that bug and to create that bug. They are the inevitable outcome of an interestingly designed system to an extent. And some bugs are just because you're lazy or forgot.
Can you elaborate on what you mean by that? Do you mean like the bug that comes out because of a bunch of creative decisions?
I mean the exact the creative decision to make things so complex. The alien bug that Austin just referenced, like, that's a bug. That's something going wrong, obviously. But it's going wrong in a very specific way because there's so many interlocking systems of where that alien can be.
Yeah.
They're probably
right.
But then that creates an outcome which is the player's confused about where the alien is, which actually matches what's causing the bug. There's a famous one when I was a kid reading gaming magazines, and like a lot of these stories, I bet it's not true. That in Black and White, the creatures, you grow these creatures that would help you look after your cities, and in Black and White, the creatures got hungry and they wanted food, and they also, because of the way the system had been built, knew that they were made of food, so they started eating their own limbs. So you had the monsters that you'd be commanding would just suddenly not have an arm because they'd eaten their own arm because they knew their arm was made of meat.
Video games are fucking cool.
And that's what I'm saying, is that systemic richness is what creates these bugs. If our games were less interesting, we'd have less bugs.
Although I will say, to your question of like, has anything ever shipped seemingly bug-free? The only thing I can think of that is an immaculate gaming experience that I just think is the most perfect game ever made by anyone ever was Inside. Oh. Well, Portal's also pretty fucking perfect, but
great game.
But
guarantee Inside will ship with bugs though.
It probably did, but
I saw one, but I don't doubt it.
I certainly didn't come across any that was not part of the discourse in any way that it was like a friend of mine, this was his hypothesis. He didn't work on it, but since they had apparently worked on that game for like 7 or 8 years, my friend's hypothesis was they had that game gray boxed like within 6 months. And then it was like 6.5 years of polish and perfection because it is so perfectly executed. It's one of those where it is
thinking about that game.
Same.
It's fucking good.
It's a rare counterexample to what you just said, Mike. I totally agree with what you're saying, but there are these occasional
it's
gems.
Not a very systemically complex game, right? Like it's
no, that's true. No,
it's a very simple, well executed game. Yeah. You know.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
But beautifully executed, like clearly,
flawlessly. But like, yeah, you're right. It's not. It doesn't have complex systems.
Yeah, your bugs in a game like that would be tied to collision boxes, basically.
Animations, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it would be light stuff, basically. Very fixable and very iteratively solvable.
The language of... There's a segment in that game where you're in like a walking line and you're going through security and you are the only like sentient being in the line, and the others, you have to follow them to stand
forward.
Yeah, and like how you as a player pick up how quickly what's happening and what the stakes are and what you're walking into because of that with no words.
It's
genuinely, I gave myself goosebumps talking about that just now. I think it's so fucking good.
To Mike's point about like a primary school teacher, that game teaches you so much with such like sleight of hand and also world building. You walk away feeling like you've just really learned a lot narratively.
The whole world.
You know, like, you know, obviously I'm no stranger to wordless narrative experiences, but that game communicates something of, you know, like Journey is a symbolic kind of experience. It's more like
I was going to ask you, have you played Astrobot yet and seen the Journey stuff in that? That's got some.
Does it? I've heard
it's got some Journey stuff in it.
A friend of mine messaged and said that he was like, "This game is Mario 64 level brilliant." People was like,
"It might be game of the year."
Yeah, I've heard that.
I've been listening to that GPU song. Just because I'm hyped about Astrobot. So I've been listening to it like all the week.
That GPU song
it's so good.
Slaps.
Yeah,
so good.
It's high on the.
Who is the composer for that, Austin?
So Kenny Young is the composer who is. I think that there's. I don't know in terms of songs, but in terms of like the score and kind of architect of musical vision, Kenny. Gotcha. He worked on the last one. What was it called?
Astro's Playroom.
Yeah, he worked on that one, and he used to be in house at Media Molecule. He's
that tracks.
He's deeply this kind of flavor experience. He's also just one of those very known quantities in the game audio space. He's always involved in a lot of mentorship stuff at GDC, and he's just a wonderful human being. I've been really excited specifically because he's just an awesome dude. I'm very curious to hear what he's done with it, and it's been fun to see various. Like Neil Druckmann, you know, sharing like the Last of Us stuff
people
in there,
about it
and
being
like
game of the year because like it
God
has
of
been a
War
weird
people.
Year.
It's surprising how I just started playing the Hellblade 2, which it didn't seem to make a big like explosion the way the first one did when it came out, and so far playing it, I'm like, this is so in line with the first one. I'm surprised it hasn't seemingly been a big
criticisms of length.
Did it get swallowed up by something else? Was this? It feels like something else came out straight after or something. Did the discourse just go somewhere else after it came out?
Mostly just people complaining about it being short. I think it's like only like 5 hours or so, which like I'm fine with. But
yeah, no, sign me the fuck up for that. But it says 7 hours on howlongtobeat.com, which is basically precisely. Yeah, it's
someone online exaggerated a short runtime on a video game.
It says it looks like it's of identical scope on average to the first one.
Yeah, true.
I thought the first one was an unbelievably excellent game. I thought it was absolutely incredible, and so I've been excited. It's been one of those that I've been slow to get to it, but I've been eager to get in, and I jumped in and
that first game too that I actually just replayed, and it didn't hold up for me as well as it did in my memory, but I wonder if that's because I didn't play it with headphones. Like, I really think that my choice to not play it with headphones may have significantly hurt my second playthrough of it.
It's probably the only game I've ever played where the first thing it says is, really headphones? Recommend you play this in headphones.
I think Inside does that too, which, by the way, I just Googled Inside Game Bugs Reddit to see if there are any complaints about bugs. There aren't any on the first 5 pages. Not a single mention of bugs in Inside. We should reach out to Playdead and be like, hey, you got any?
Has there ever been a bug?
What are your bugs? What have you got there? Did I ever tell you that I have their weird sex doll thing?
Oh yeah, the thing that they did, like their PR thing that they did.
Yes, the collector's edition. They had a.
Who was that a tie-in with? What's the company?
Real Dolls. Is it sex toy I mean, it's not. A sex toy feels.
I'm gonna need some context.
Yeah, I'll give you the context.
Why? Why would you need context?
Playdead made a very late collector's edition for Inside, which one of my favorite games ever. It took so long for them to develop, where they made the Blob. Gonna be vague about that because in case anybody is watching this and is compelled to play that game, go do it. Yes. Out of the same material as the real dolls, sex dolls, which I guess are like full life size. I'm actually not sure, but like human, they feel like human.
One would presume. One would presume. I don't know.
I mean, what do you need the whole body for?
the texture that's supposed to be sort of quasi human skin. Silicone.
Yeah, I let people spank it pretty regularly. If they come here, I'm like, you want to spank the
huddle?
The huddle. So it's made from like, it feels like real human skin. It always feels moist. And it picks up a lot of dirt. It really gets dusty, that thing. I have to wash it.
You'd say it's filthy.
It's pretty. It gets pretty dirty. Yeah.
it makes me think of one of my single favorite Seth MacFarlane American Dad jokes, where there's the Japanese kids' parents have a sex doll in their closet that all the kids discover, and they're playing with it as a toy, and they don't really know what it actually is. And the parents see them, and they're kind of like horrified that the kids are playing with this thing, not knowing what it is, because they're trying to recreate the old movie Mannequin using this sex doll. And they, you see the mother and father go, "My God, you see them playing with that? Do you think it's clean?" And the father goes, "You know it's not clean."
Of course it's not.
Why? Why
good.
Does the inside doll have a hole in it?
It has.
Mike, do we need to have a birds and a bees conversation?
And a stand. My stand actually broke too, so now it just sits there. But I name all my plants based on what they're next to. So I actually have a plant called Playdead because it is right next to the real doll Playdead collector's edition.
I don't care for this, Alana. My life was better not knowing that this product existed.
Disagree.
You've offended his British sensibilities that don't do well with polite society ruiners.
I found the bug. I'll say that much. I found the bloody bug.
No, intentional bug though. That's their scope being so big that they made a bug, which is this sex toy that has a hole in the bottom of it. We should at some point, maybe on an anniversary episode or towards the end of the year, try to come up with our definitive list of the top 10 video games of all time and just see how long that takes us. I wonder if we did it on a weekend, if we would just be here for 5 hours. Because I feel like Inside comes up a lot.
For me, Inside is very possibly number one.
I think Portal's the best game ever made.
Well, see, you're wrong, and I quit the show.
5 hours, let's go.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's the thing. At some point, you reach this territory where you go, now we're in this apples and oranges territory where...
Well, I have trouble with Portal versus Portal 2.
About which one you prefer?
About which one is the best game of all time. Because one doesn't exist without the other one.
For you, it's between those two. So those are the 1 and 2 slots in the...
Yes.
Or is it an either or? Okay.
It's one of them.
All right.
That's what I mean, where Portal and
where
Inside...
Where does Metal Gear Solid go? Metal Gear Solid obviously is above that.
Can't be. It's Portal. Impossible.
No, I think Metal Gear Solid...
It was a really tough thing about working at IGN. I'm sure I've spoken about that on the show before as well. It's like, when you rank those lists, it's very difficult not to go... Okay, well, that game couldn't exist without this game, though. So then we have to go this game. Is Half-Life the best game ever made because it influenced BioShock and every other game that came after it? Like, it's so...
Surely you end up with, like, a ball in a cup, though, eventually. Like, you gotta go back
pretty much.
Yeah, I reject... I sort of reject that. Because that would basically, like you say, you end up in this infinite regression back to like cave drawings,
really
basically.
Tough not
that
to,
you
though,
can't.
Because, like, how do you quantify best game? Like, it's nonsense anyway. So you try to come up with rules to give yourself a framework because it's impossible. Like, what does it even mean?
But you can expand on and perfect a thing, without while owing full debt to it, but still having added something. Like I always look at the Leone Westerns where The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly was not the first one, but it is the one that like achieved a level of cultural impact because the formula was sort of improved, and then just that one stuck the landing absolutely amazingly.
Yeah.
So you go,
I mean, there's a really interesting trilogy that like if you watch A Fistful of Dollars for a Few Dollars More, the leap is so apparent in quality, such a huge jump, and then you get to Good,
from
Bad,
1 to 2.
Oh yeah, and all 3 of them are like it's like watching somebody improve in real time, which I feel like we often don't have a lot of sympathy for. Like watching someone be bad at something when they start it, they often get discouraged. But it was long enough ago that there wasn't Reddit, so it worked out. Okay.
Yeah, well, the only analogy that you would really have is like when TV shows have a kind of janky first season, and then you watch them back and you go, oh wow, they really like you can see. Yeah. Like, have you ever seen that? What's that YouTube channel that will do those videos called like The Day the Office Was Born, where they go, this episode is the one that we have decided is like.
I haven't heard of that. That's really interesting though.
Oh, they do both. They
like
do
the opposite of jumping the shark, landing on the shark.
Yeah, well, they do both. That channel does
cool.
the day The Simpsons was born. They'll be like season 2, episode 4 or whatever is where they hit their stride, and it's but then they'll also do The Day the Simpsons died, where they go, we think from this point forward they seem to have lost their way, and they do.
That's really cool.
I find them to be compelling. I wish I could remember what channel that was.
I'm sure someone will know in the comments.
Someone will get it in the comments.
Speaking of which, I have to run. Wow, look at us. We were on a topic, sort of. For
Entertain the Elk. That's the name of that YouTube channel.
Entertain the Elk. I'll check that out.
The important thing is that we got to the sex doll. That's the important thing.
You're welcome.
I will
squeeze that in, so to speak.
I'm gonna throw a little. I don't
want to see a photo. I do not. Please don't send me a photo of your sex doll.
I'm sending it to you without consent.
Yes, as a Snapchat.
Snapchat it to you.
You're also HR.
Get Snapchat just to send it to you, and then you complain to me, HR.
Yeah, I will add as a thing that actually remarkably is sort of on point, as a slight bit of self-promotion. My beloved compatriots at Stoic, who made the Banner Saga games, today launched in early access their next game called Towerborn. It is very much
awesome.
If you want to be part of the community that helps us improve this game before we launch in earnest, join in. And so the whole point of, obviously, like, we forget because early access has kind of like become this new domain of quasi-release, that the whole idea is this is meant to be playable, but it is not finished. It is meant to feel strong and hopefully offer you something meaningful. But if you want to help us improve it and be part of the community, that's the point of joining early access.
Awesome.
I found, because that Banner Saga started as a Kickstarter, these guys are super, super engaged with their community, and and I just love them to death. I've worked with them now for over 10 years. Working on Towerborn has been an absolute dream. I will have a lot more say to it when we get closer to launch. But since it was literally today, if people are interested in finding bugs...
means it was 2 weeks ago by the time this airs. But also, I'll leave a link in the description where people can check that out as well.
Yeah, it's on currently Steam exclusive.
Well done on aging.
Well, yeah, congrats on
I survived.
Huge win for all of us.
Yeah, Bear texted me and was like, "You made it!" Like, against the odds.
That's it for this episode of Play Watch. I said he was a director. So, Mike, you're a composer now. Congrats. All right, bug fixing. Let's go.
Well, I've been playing with my synths, so yeah, there we go. Chop swap.